A little bit. I got 3 minutes. I'm good. Thank you.
I'll take one.
Thanks, John.
I think it's well.
Thank you.
I'm good.
I didn't even know those were back
I
there.
showed up early because I read the time on the agenda.
6
Shut up
o'clock.
at 5.
Yeah, we were at 5, then I went over to Popeyes and had dinner.
I found a soda and a bag of Fritos in the conference
There you
room.
go.
All right, we ready? Ready to roll?
Rock and roll.
All right, let's rock and roll. So I'll call this meeting to order at 6 o'clock. And we'll do roll.
Councilmember Julio Martinez,
Here.
Councilmember Fenn,
Here.
Treasurer Patel, Chair David Vanderpool,
Here.
Vice Chair Ron Rader,
Here.
Resident Member Christian Fernandez,
Here.
alternate member, oh, sorry, we have a vacancy for that. I apologize. Thank you.
Vacant. All right, action for any request for an excused absence.
I have none.
All right, any adjustments to the agenda? Any conflict of interest disclosures? Let's see, let's go with Christian. I'll let you lead us in the pledge.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, this meeting will be open to the public and conducted in a virtual format to be inclusive of all participation preferences. Public comment participation is encouraged by emailing any comments to the city clerk's office or by calling in using the phone number provided on the front of the agenda. Do we have any public comments for items not on the agenda?
I have no written request. Jackie, do we have any callers on the line?
No callers on the line.
All righty, then we're moving on to the first action item, which is review and recommend the adoption of amended and restated special assessments and community facilities, district goals, and policies.
Yes, good evening. Thank you. Good evening, Finance Committee members. Thanks you for coming for this special meeting. The Finance Department has been working with our consultants on our special assessment community facility districts, goals, and policies, which were created in 1995. With changes in law, best practices, and cities' growth, it's important that we update the policies, strengthen financial protections, and improve transparency. To provide context, we do have our CFD administrator, Shane Spicer from Spicer Consulting here this evening, who is going to be giving a CFD 101 presentation and then go over the key changes in the policy. So with that, I'll pass it over to Shane Spicer. We also have our financial advisor, Michael Bush, in audience, and bond counsel, Brian Forbath, should be on Zoom as well. Okay.
Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here. I'm not sure if everybody can see the PowerPoint presentation. All right. Perfect. So we're going to discuss all things CFDs. As Jennifer mentioned, we've been working on the updating of the CFD's goals and policies, as well as taking a look at the overall CFD program that the city has in place, and trying to provide some best practices and recommendations, and walk through all these things through this presentation. So as Jennifer mentioned, we have our bond counsel, Brian Forbath, who worked on the red line version of the goals and policies, providing recommended changes that are consistent with best practices used in this industry, as well as Michael Bush as your financial advisor, providing guidance on how the city can best utilize this tool, as well as myself on the administrative aspects, as well as some of the advantages that the city can take in best using this as a tool for financing for infrastructure and services. So I'm going to cover a few things here. The existing CFDs within the city of Beaumont, the way that they've been utilized in the past. Discussion a little bit on the growing needs for implementing a streamlined process and approach for the services components for the city's CFDs, as well as looking at how the city can continue to best use facility CFDs to protect the taxpayers. Primarily, all of this rolling into a CFD's goals and policy update to have that come back to council for approval. So as you may know, CFDs have been around for a while, and the city has used these throughout since the early 80s. The CFDs were established under the Melrose Act in 1982, and they're primarily used to finance facilities and services for public improvements and public services. One thing to note that CFDs taxes are only levied on properties within the boundaries of those CFDs. So when we do use the term citywide or annexable or anything like that, those are only for properties that are within the CFD themselves. It's not to everybody not already in. So CFDs have been a prominent use in the city of Beaumont. We do see that there would be a benefit for the CFDs going forward as the anticipated growth of about 42,000 new residents by 2040. That would require service impacts demands to increase the number of police officers, 64 additional police officers, 20 firefighters, as well as significant funding that's required for parks, public improvements, streets, and storm drains, and so forth. Without this mitigation, these shortfalls would fall on a general fund to provide those funding. Currently, the city has over 82 individual CFDs and improvement areas, of which 33,500 were levied for fiscal year 24-25. That included both bonded districts as well as services-only CFDs, and $30.1 million in total levies. That number increased just recently, and we just finished the tax rolls this year, so we can report back with those updates. There are several CFDs within the city that include both public safety and services components, as well as bonded CFDs, but primarily the tool had been used for bonding facility CFDs with later use on services. The structure is not quite streamlined or implemented citywide, and we're going to cover that in a little bit. This is just an illustration of the array of all the various CFDs throughout the city, and as you can see, it's been used widely throughout the years. Excuse me. Turning to the city's goals and policies. So, as required under the Melrose Act, the City Council needs to adopt a CFD goals and policy, and the city had done that in 1995, in which we're bringing back an updated version to reflect changes in the way that CFDs have been used through the years. So, the primary objective is to provide uniform guidelines for the formation of CFDs, and for the financing for acquisition and construction of public infrastructure, as well as address public needs for public benefits. So we're going to go through some of the considerations that have been redlined in the document that's included in your packet. And then we can come back and talk about any one of these at the conclusion and take some feedback. So the policy considerations include the city supporting the use of CFDs for projects that demonstrate clear public need and benefit for both infrastructure and services. CFDs may be initiated by the city, but typically done by the developer and landowners as a primary owner requesting formation of these districts. All costs incurred by the city for its consultants and financing team is made by the applicant and not cost to the city. And the city does retain exclusive control over selecting their financing team. As well as including the financing of the financing team, also eligible facilities that are included. These are consistent with the Melrose Act, where there are streets and highways, parks and recreational facilities, police and fire protection facilities, storm drains, and libraries. And then the CFDs also include development impact fees on a case-by-case basis. And the intent there is that those development impact fees would turn into actual public improvements, which is what the CFD should be financing. And then we do want to focus a little bit on services CFDs, where public safety and obviously park maintenance and drainage and other services are sustainable through the life of the project, but as well as after the developer's gone and the communities benefiting from those services, we want to make sure that those are identified and fully funded as new development occurs. CFD bonds, they must meet a 4-to-1 value to lien ratio. Your financing team has been very diligent of ensuring that these bonds are not requested too early in development. And so having a 4-to-1 value to lien is not an issue because there's oftentimes a well built out development. Also, one of the requirements is that if the developer does own 20% of the effective tax, that they do put up a letter of credit or a surety to cover 2 times debt service. And that's pretty standard practice, but one that is prudent for effective management of bonded CFDs. And overall, the effective tax rate would not exceed 2%, and that's standard. That includes all overlapping related assessments and taxes. As well as escalators. These escalators are limited to facilities that they may escalate up to 2% annually. And that services typically escalate at a greater of CPI or some threshold that meets those service costs. And that difference differentiated between a maintenance district versus a public safety CFD because of the type of costs that they're incurring. Special tax formulas include a 110% annual debt service coverage. This is something that we'll cover in a little bit when we talk about the benefits of the city being the lead agency for bonded CFDs. Bond terms generally are 30 years. That's something that we often get calls where people say, well, it was supposed to be for 20 years, but really typically it is 30 years. So those are the life expectancy of a bonded district. The effective tax rate of 2%, when we implement that effective tax rate at the time of bonding, we would require that the developer, in the event that the effective tax rate is greater than 2%, pay down that extra portion down to that 2% so that meets that threshold. So that happens from time to time in a recessionary type market. Buyer disclosure is important and significant. We make sure it's addressed here, that it's consistent with the government code, and that we also identify that the city reserves the ability to grant waivers to these policies for a case-by-case basis. And finally, the ability to require the applicant to pay a premium on city fees financed. Now, this is an instrument that many cities have implemented that allow for a CFD financing where the developer wants to finance their development impact fees, and the city ends up having to manage that, administer that, and monitor where the use of those funds are, creates an additional administrative burden, and oftentimes requests that a 20% premium be on top of that, where cities are able to take that money and apply it to additional facilities that may not have been necessarily conditioned on that project, but for the benefit of that community that's paying that tax. For instance, if there was a missing traffic signal that wasn't identified as a condition, or there was a road segment connection that would be beneficial to that community. So be able to use these additional dollars towards those improvements has been something the cities have taken advantage of. And then finally, allowing for JCFAs or joint community facility agreements with other agencies that are participating in the funding of bond proceeds for improvements, water districts, school districts. The benefit of that is allowing for a developer to come to the city as a one-stop shop in which they'll be able to finance not just city fees and improved facilities, but additionally water district or school district. Cities are the only, city and county agencies are the only ones that can be a lead agency on those, where They're not the primary share of the facilities being financed. Water districts or school districts are limited to being where they're the lion's share of those fundings. So this is something that allows for the city to have their facilities be included. So moving into annexable services CFD programs, this is a more streamlined approach to addressing how the city could better use public safety CFDs or maintenance services CFDs for any type of development. Typically, historically, the city has used CFDs where large residential developments would come in and want facility financing, and then as a part of that, have a services tax component. Early days was maintenance services, and later started adding public safety as well. But what often happens is all other development that may not be requiring, requesting a facility CFD may not be annexed, is not annexing necessarily, and paying for maintenance services or public safety services. So this is something that brings that forward so that it's an understood program that any type of residential development with various thresholds would be annexing into a public safety CFD, or a residential or commercial project could be annexing into a maintenance services CFD to pay for their impacts and services. Public safety CFDs, they applied in this case to residential properties only, and they would be annexable citywide at the same rate for all new development. So if that property tax escalates in future years, they'd be annexing in at the same rate, so everybody's paying the same rate for public safety. Maintenance services CFDs are more curtailed to that project specific impacts. So their development brings on additional landscaping or additional drainage facilities or traffic signal impacts. So they would be paying specific to those maintenance needs and creating their own tax zones that's consistent with that. So every tract would have their own tax rate consistent with the costs that they're incurring. So public safety CFDs fund specifically police protection, fire suppression, paramedic services. Now these are for services only. These aren't for buildings or trucks or anything like that. These are for personnel costs. And we would base this on a fiscal impact model. That model would be dependent on the current operating budgeting structure that the city has. What the anticipated development horizon that we'd be looking at, for instance, if it was 2040, and what the service needs and costs that are associated to meet that impact, increased population growth, to match it with the service needs at that as well. So it correlates that growth with a tax rate that would meet those new impacts and alleviate the general fund from having to foot the difference, or existing property owners to pay for new growth impacts. This, again, is a citywide annexable type district. So again, not everybody's in it. It's only as new development occurs that would be annexing into it. For maintenance services, again, it would be a citywide annexable structure. In this case, there would be two different types of taxes. A special tax A, which would pay for those services the city would already be providing, similar to other areas of development, for instance, landscaping, drainage, street lighting, pavement management. But it also has a tax B, which would be basically an insurance that if there's a property owners association maintaining a drainage basin, for instance, that this contingent tax would be established, and if the city had to take over maintenance of that, then there would be a funding source already in place to trigger to provide the revenues needed for the city to take over those services. So it's a pretty good insurance policy for property owners that are maintaining things. And again, each tract would have its own tax zone and specific costs, and these again would escalate at 2% or CPI, whichever is greater. So yes, the benefits, as I mentioned, were growth pays for growth and not the general fund. That's the idea here. It adapts the development-specific needs approach and creates transparency Each of these would have their own individual line item on the tax bill with their own annual reports that would be specific to that tax structure. And so there's a lot of transparency there, as well as it promotes long-term financial sustainability as growth occurs. One of the things that I wanted to point out is that with these maintenance districts, for instance, this is how specific we get when we look at a new development. We look at their very specific maintenance obligations, require that a maintenance exhibit be provided that outlines what those tract-specific costs would include. In a residential project, as I mentioned, would include a tract-specific landscaping, lighting, street maintenance. Street maintenance includes pavement management. So slurry seal costs would be factored as a part of their tax base. That money would be accumulated over a 6-7 year period to be used towards a slurry seal project, along with other CIP dollars for that. And then as I mentioned, citywide services like a park maintenance. Now, for instance, this example doesn't show a park being included in the development, but those units will be using some park. And similar to how the Quimby is calculated, we would determine what their share of maintenance for parks would be inclusive of. And so that everybody's still paying towards parks, because that's a vital part of sustaining residential development. Other amenities, including trails and graffiti abatement, are included as citywide type services. Now, this is an example for residential development. So here's an example for non-residential, which is smaller in scale, but again, tract specific, project specific. So it has its frontage street on, as you can see here, highlighted in green, showing that, they're responsible for that maintenance area adjacent to their property, off-site street lights, traffic signals, those type of items, as well as public maintained drainage, but then as well as any on-site drainage that might be maintained privately would be included in a contingent tax B, and we would identify that as an HOA maintained area on the exhibit. So through this application process, what we're talking about is with the citywide annexable districts is that they would be part of conditions on new development, both residential and non-residential, industrial projects. They would have to complete an application, submit that to the city for review, include a maintenance exhibit, go through all the iterations of coming up with, did they fully include all those services as everything listed shown appropriately and signed off by Public Works or planning, that these are consistent with what their development demands are going to include. So that's all inclusive in the application for maintenance. And there's also an application that would be included for the safety services CFD for the applicant. And this is a flow chart, just shows how those projects that would come in could be included. A residential can go into both a public safety and a maintenance. Again, non-residential into maintenance. And it goes through this flow chart of about 90 days to get through the annexation process. Requires 3 council meetings, an ROI meeting that approves the intent to annex, sets the public hearing meeting, which would be the tabulation and the voting and the first reading of the ordinance, and then finally a second reading of the ordinance at approval. So moving into how city controls of facility CFDs protects taxpayers, this is where, we've had a lot of discussions at some of the meetings about how, the city's intentions on how to manage these bonded CFDs. And we're talking specifically bonded CFDs. The ability that where a city-controlled CFD is that you have the ability to set the tax rates, the timing of the bond issuances, and then as we just recently went through, the refinancing decisions. The cities aren't the only agencies that have the ability to form CFDs in the city boundaries. School districts do, water districts do, and they all have their own legislative bodies and their own goals and objectives. one of the things that if another agency is doing, managing these CFDs, the city doesn't get to tell them, what their tax rates are or when they're going to issue bonds or whether to pass on savings. So that's a critical thing to keep in mind as the city continues to entertain facility CFD financings. There's also where other agencies may also maintain a maximum tax. We're constantly talking about reducing tax rates. Other agencies could and have kept a maximum tax rate and just use those additional funds to fund other projects, not specific to their project. So that's something to note, as well as the tendency to potentially overtax even beyond bonds maturity for projects. So benefiting for the city issuing bonds, so as I had mentioned before, we had talked about the effective tax rate of 110 coverage. When the city does issue the first set of bonds, immediately the taxpayers are able to recognize up to a 10% savings in their tax rate, just because that coverage is not needed to be levied if the city is managing the district. That, again, not necessarily the case with other agencies where that effective tax, that 100% of the max tax would continue even after bond issuance. And again, passing back savings and refinancings is a big benefit to the homeowners that the city is managing those. And we've seen recently up to $200 to $400 per unit in savings as a result of refinancing. And then again, local control. One of the other benefits is if the city being the lead is that you do truly become that one-stop shop for development, because they'll be working with the city on, annexing into the city's maintenance district or public safety CFD as well as the facility CFD. So the costs to form and establish these are lower. The administration burdens as well are lower because you're not working with multiple agencies. So that concludes those discussions on the policies, updates, the annexable district approach, as well as the facility CFD control. We're here to take direction, to have a discussion on any updates or points of concern that you might have, and then update the city's goals and policies, and initiate any annexable CFD formations, and bring this back on September 2nd for adoption. That concludes it.
All right, then I guess we'll get to question. Oh, somebody. I thought I heard somebody say something. Maybe I didn't. Okay. Well, I definitely had a question. Let me ask you. So obviously we're making a change from the status quo. What is the process now? Let's say somebody wants to do this, somebody wants to establish a CFD. What kind of steps do they go through?
Before you get into your questions, I want to give some background on the city's program. So I've been involved with the city CFT program for a little more than 10 years. So when a lot of the CFD issues were presented specifically in Beaumont, that's when I came in. The policy the preface to your question, I think, when I got here, the policy that Shane's referring to in his opening remarks was old. It established CFD 93-1.
Got it.
One of the first tasks I was asked to do was to look at the city's CFD programs and look at how it was being implemented and practiced. The first round of feedback I gave regarding the program pointed out some challenges and maybe some lack of practice. To be quite candid, there was a lot of litigation regarding the practices post that CFD program. What we did do, however, is we adopted standard practices. So we've been operating, this is why I wanted to answer this before your question. We've been operating basically similar to what Shane is describing to you. In 2007, there was a big crash of the housing market.
Right.
And that's usually what triggered the policy like that Shane is presenting to you.
Sure.
In this case, in Beaumont, it didn't happen. They continued to operate under an old policy that really kind of benefited the developers more than it did the residents. So that was one significant finding that we had. And as Shane pointed out, the value to lean and some of those other issues and how they set up these different areas. Well, you'll notice in the old CFDs, a lot of improvement areas. So those were done for two reasons. They were breaking up developments into smaller pieces so they could issue more debt. The team that
Okay.
was working on the bonds got paid every time a debt was issued.
Okay.
So they could issue as much debt as they want, and they all got paid more. The group you have now, they look at larger projects. We actually make them build projects to much more significant level of completion, around 80%.
Okay.
What they were doing before is they would take, for example, a 100-unit project, and they would issue bonds every like 30 or 40 units.
Okay.
So you'd end up with 3 bonds, and us, you'd get 1 bond. And so some of what Shane has presented to you, we've been doing for a long time.
Okay.
I wanted you to be aware of that. There's not much of a change in implementation, but the policy itself has been dated. I did find a policy in my files from about 2016, but we couldn't find any evidence that it was adopted. So I think at that time, Julio, maybe I think Richard Warren might have been here as an interim guy. We may have given it to him, and it just never made it to the council for consideration. But when myself was brought in about that time, the same time Stradling was brought in, both Brian and I have a lot of experience with CFDs. We said, okay, we have to do it a different way. There was also an SEC lawsuit against the city at that time that required us to implement the program a lot differently and a lot more disclosure in the program. So all that's been happening for the last 10 years.
Okay.
So most of what I think Mr. Spicer is presenting to you, I'd like to believe we're doing. A lot of it has just not been memorialized.
Got it.
But I'm sure he can answer the process that's in place now and walk you through each step from the application all the way through financing. But I thought I'd give you some context of that before we did that.
Okay, that's fine. Go ahead. Thank you.
So to answer your question, how are we doing them now? What's the process? So there is an application for development come in and approach finance, for instance, saying, hey, I want to form a facility CFD. And that's what really is the genesis. It's based
Okay.
on a facility CFD backed by a residential project.
Got it.
I think there is a discussion of the use of a facility CFD with a DA with Beaumont Point. But that's kind of the one-off, hasn't been used in that capacity previously, but is doable. But the idea here is that typically it'd be a developer would approach the city asking to form a facility CFD, and then on top of that, we would condition for them to include a maintenance district, services costs, as well as public safety. So some of this is being implemented as Mike had mentioned, but it's just not as clearly spelled out
Right.
to the community, to the development community, so that they understand these are the rules of engagement.
Okay, so you're saying that the process, if I'm hearing correctly, the process is similar to what you're what you're actually practicing now is similar to the policy that we're looking at right now, basically.
Yes.
So, okay, but it sounds like it took periods of time and various challenges to come up with this policy, is basically what it sounds like.
The practice, I think, that's being in place now, and as Shane described, I think is pretty standard.
Okay.
So the developer community kind of goes, okay, this is the standard practice everywhere. There are some nuances here that are different than some other locations. So as your two council members know, CFDs no longer have escalators. The council made a decision at a council meeting, like, hey, no more CFDs with escalators.
Okay.
The development community knows it, so they don't ask for it in the applications, for example. And then every refinancing opportunity, the first thing the council will ask is, can we remove the escalators?
Okay.
So I think there's only a few CFDs left that even have escalators in them anymore. And so we're not doing that. The services CFDs, somewhat of an interesting topic. The city is, being in Riverside County and growing, it is subject to the master annexation agreement that every city in Riverside County has. And through that agreement, the city gets very little property tax for annexed areas. And so it was discussed again about 10 years ago that the city needed to address that shortfall that would create if development continued. And so services CFDs, to Shane's point, were expanded to include public safety. Before that, they were just maintenance. So as the residential community started to get larger, the general fund was having to have the full responsibility of public safety for these newer developments. And so that was one of the other findings. The council came back and said, okay, look, we've got to deal with this in a different way. And so the services CFD to include public safety was added, and Shane's group is now the administrator of some of those programs.
Okay. So this basically enshrines what, and communicates to the public what the policy is, even though it's kind of been developed over a period of time.
I would say the basics of the policy is certainly that, as you described.
Okay.
I think what Mr. Spicer, and I don't want to speak for him, but I think what Mr. Spicer may be trying to get at is what other changes might this group want to see? For
Got it.
example, JCFAs, I think he brought up that, whether there's an interest in pursuing those JCAs from a different perspective. I think as Mr. Spicer pointed out, and it's come to the council once before, this council is really good at administering the CFD program. They're always on top of it. They always ask, can we lower the rates? How can we lower the rates?
Sure.
And I think the point that Mr. Spicer is making with the JCFA is if the city is the controlling agency, it can control when the CFD is refinanced and what happens with the savings. If the
Okay.
water district or school district does their own, there's no control. And what we've seen in other communities, I won't speak for the ones here, is water districts and school districts will refinance the bonds, but they'll keep the tax rate high. They do that on purpose so they get capital pay-go money continuing. And they build new facilities, they keep building. Water districts do the same thing. In this case, if the city were the controlling partner in a CFD, for example, it would direct us probably to refinance it and save the money to the taxpayer. So that's something different that the council
Yeah, no,
hasn't
that's
looked
good.
at as one option. We've talked a little bit about the escalators. There's other probably mechanisms that maybe Mr. Spicer can point out from the standards. We have some clients that charge premium if they want to charge for impact fees, for example. Everybody's got a little bit different program. But I think as presented, here's the standard policy. Your feedback gives us guidance as to what you want to see happen to the policy. There are benefits that we could seek further that may cost the developer, some money to do or incentivize them not to do, for example. Those are all, I think, on the table tonight.
Okay, and then one last thing. So in your professional opinion, if we decide to go forth with this, those past challenges would no longer be challenges because the current policy has incorporated all what we've learned is best practice?
Yeah, if I understand Christian correctly, I don't think there'll be any surprises from any developers.
Okay.
I think we've been operating under a very similar policy, as Mr. Spicer pointed out.
Okay,
One hasn't been officially adopted, but it's been practiced
right.
on a regular basis, and it is a standard policy for that.
The biggest thing for me is that we don't want those kind of things happening again.
Yeah, right. I
Obviously.
think
So-
the other bit of feedback I would give the group, I think as a general practice, recommend to our clients, they go through like their development impact fee studies every 5 years. Might be a good idea to have your CFD goals and policies to be reviewed on some regular basis. The market does change
Right.
over time. As Shane pointed out, we're now starting to see, based on the development and specifically in Beaumont, we're starting to see a lot more interest in commercial industrial projects. They may
Right.
come to you and say, hey, what about CFDs for us? And that would be somewhat new for the council to talk about.
Okay, great, thank you. I'll open it up. I don't want to hog all the questions. Oh, go ahead.
Yes, if I might, Shane. This doesn't affect any existing bond, like I live in Solera, and I think there are 3 different bonds in Solera, and some people pay more than others, depending on when like you said, when it was built, when the units were built, and there's 1,200 of them. Anyway, so this doesn't affect that.
Correct.
The existing, is there existing funds coming from this program? If there is existing funds or excessive funds over what's collected, does that go back into the general fund or does it go back to the taxpayer? Where does that money go? If there's more collected than should have been collected?
On new development or on existing development?
Yeah.
So the idea here is a better management of, and the city does a great job. The city has been able to ensure that you're maintaining as low possible tax rates while providing vital services. What we're talking about here is not much different than that, other than we're talking about separating out some of the services from bonded districts so that it's clear and it's not so convoluted.
Yeah, not to,
But the idea, though, is, yes, through the budget process, the city evaluates every year, what are the funds on hand, what are the, what are the service costs for the next year, so on, so forth, and I think Mike might have some more to add.
The problem is 10 years ago, it was all put into one fund, so it's a good question. Now, Jennifer keeps track of every single CFD individually. The money is held in either a debt service account or a special taxes account that pays for administration. This last refinancing that Shane referenced, if there's excess money, we actually buy down the debt, which helps us lower the rates.
yeah, that's what I thought.
So it sits there, yeah.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, and if there could be hypothetically, just for full disclosure to the board here, if there's some capital within the project that's not completed, the funds could be used to complete capital. So let's say, for example, your developer is supposed to put a fence, around some property or around some common property, didn't happen. Jennifer could then take money out of the fund and say, okay, put the fence up. We have the money to do it. So you can use it for that purpose.
So those funds are generally earmarked for certain.
For the specific district that you're
districts,
referring
for
to, yeah.
specific projects.
It will
yeah.
never see
It's
the
not
general
just-
fund.
Not just out
No.
in the cloud.
No. Now, the 93-1, when you think about what I think they were trying to do with 93-1, the whole city was at 93-1. In that case, they could have used the money anywhere they wanted. I think that was intentional. It's not a bad idea if you do it right. It's really bad if you don't. So in this case, the council went, hey, we got to be more accountable, more responsible, and be able to track the money better.
Sure.
So now all the money stays within each individual district and is managed by Jennifer and her staff. And then Shane reviews it annually as part of his administrative basis. Then when we look at debt and the ability to refinance debt, the first question we'll ask, how much money is in here that we can use to buy down debt?
Yeah, it sounds like we've learned from our mistakes of the past.
The program is a lot different than what it was. That's for sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, anybody else? Okay, Dave?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You mentioned 30 years was the general timeframe for the bond. Is the new applications have a general, is it a general set time, 30 years?
Sorry. Does the new application have a set time frame? Like, will it be a 30-year standard, 20 years, or 40 years?
So bond financing is a 30-year term on the bonds. So when we form the CFD, there might be a term of 45 years, for instance, but it takes several years for that project to develop, for bonds to be issued, and then the bonds would be issued for a 30-year term.
Okay.
And that 30-year term would then, what we're now doing is citing that that's going to terminate that tax.
Okay. And you mentioned the refinancing to save taxpayers, to save some money annually. When they do a refinancing, does it extend the bond term? So essentially, okay, so it stays within exactly that 30-year time frame.
Yep, it's
Okay.
one of the tests is to make sure you're not extending the debt.
Okay. And, yeah, I think that's it. And each bond is it built by track? So each track will have its own bond necessarily?
So each
Development.
development would have its own, for facility CFD would have its own CFD designation, and it would then have its own bond issuance.
Okay.
Now, we do combine other CFDs for refunding purposes, which we just recently did, in which we then are able to leverage the number of CFDs to get a better rate and further reduce that debt.
Okay,
That's
cool.
it. Thank you.
Great. David, I know you had a question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Shane, question for you on the 2% tax rate. Is that only evaluated at the beginning of the development when it's time to sell that, or estimated sale price of that property? Or is it evaluated every year when they look at the tax, as you guys do your yearly CFD for each tax bill?
Great question. It's evaluated at the time we form the CFD, and it's evaluated right as we're issuing bonds. So then we're setting that tax rate at the 2% upon bond issuance. There's many homes that sell and the prices go up and down, but those are the two critical timeframes that we evaluate when it's at the 2% effective
And
tax
and
rate.
oftentimes, bond issuance can be in the middle of a development, correct?
Well,
Is it often completed prior to the last home being done and moved in?
the bond issuance?
Yeah.
No, what we've done is we've waited, in fact, actually, the bond issuance that we're currently working on, both improvement areas are completely built out.
Okay.
So that, every unit would be evaluated at that.
And so in that example, is the property owner currently paying what the best estimate is at, or are they not paying anything at all? And then when the bond issuance happens, then it shows up on their tax bill?
No, yeah, great question. The best practice is to levy the assigned tax rate as development occurs. So the property owner is familiar with that tax.
Okay.
You're not raising taxes to issue bonds. And then when the bonds are issued, then their tax will come down.
Okay. And so assuming going forward, there's a new neighborhood, new CFD, bonds are issued. If the city were to consider then a city services CFD on top of that, then that's where the 2% is really going to factor in, because then we couldn't go above that, correct?
Correct. The way that the tax rate structure works is that services are paid ahead of facilities. So when a residential development comes forward and wants to form a facility CFD, they first have to take into account what is the city's public safety tax rate, what is the maintenance services tax rate, and then what's ever left over up to the 2% is eligible to potentially be used for facilities. So the benefit here is it's full transparency that they're going to at least know what the public safety cost would be, so then when they pro forma their project, they already know this is how much is already paying for services, and then this is what they have left to bond on.
Okay. And then to add another layer to that, the San Gregorio Pass Water Agency, they have an ad valorem tax on our properties. Our tax base in the area is about 1.3%. Everybody goes, why isn't it 1 due to Prop 13? They're half of the reason why. In the instance that we're talking about, and bonds are issued and the city's thinking of adding a services tax, and before we do so, the Pass Water Agency raises their tax rate, that will limit what we can do because it will still factor in that 2%. Is that correct?
Well, close. What happens is we will have those services CFDs established before they set the facility CFD. So that they're going to come ahead, that we're already going to know how much.
So we would expect if the city were going to do it, we would do it in conjunction?
It would be in conjunction. In
Okay.
fact, they need to take that into account first.
Okay. And then another question, do we have any annexed neighborhoods in Beaumont that do not have the services CFD in place that could potentially be added with this new policy?
Existing development wouldn't be able to be, well.
It would be a new CFD, but it's on an existing development. You can't do
We
it?
wouldn't be able to get them in. They would
Okay.
require a 2/3 registered voter election.
All right, so then I have a question to Oak Valley
Kenny,
Greens.
can I interrupt on this?
Oh, yeah. Hi, Brian.
About that? Yeah, so just one thing on that, and just, in terms of the new policy, right? The new policy sort of has, a couple main changes to it. And one of the main changes that we have is sort of this carrot for development that is not, that it's entitled and wasn't, has its entitlements, but was not required as part of its conditions of development to annex into a public safety CFD. The CFD policy, one of the changes that's in this, essentially says that, a couple different things. One, we will only finance fees for a development if that CFD would consider, annexing into a public safety CFD. It's one aspect of it. It also says that we would only do an escalator, a CFD escalator for a development if they annex into a public safety CFD. So I know escalators aren't in favor with the city, but that's in the policy we drafted as part of a potential carrot to try to capture some of those CFDs that may already have their entitlements but weren't required to annex into a public safety CFD.
Okay, I think I'm following along.
Okay, can I add to your
Yeah,
first question?
yeah.
when there's two parts of it. I think, one, the city is now looking at the CFDs when they're more substantially complete, as Shane pointed out, so 80%, which allows us to kind of see sale prices. That's how we're setting the rates, by
Okay.
actual sale price, which helps us a lot. We don't need a pricing consultant to say, here's what we think they're going to be. Like some other communities may use here, you have such substantial development, we actually can see the actual price. And we can set the tax rate based on the actual price, so that certainly helps. The other is, the program has now been embedded into the developers' minds now, that when they send us the application, they're running the numbers with the special taxes already in it. They know what they are, so they're saying, okay, here's how much we think we can borrow. We validate it and go through and go, okay, yes or no. But in most of their applications and their financial runs, they're putting all the special taxes in and the other tax rates. So they kind of know, like, okay, we have to cover all these. We just verify they're accurate.
So in a scenario where they realize let's say they're going to max out, then they're, as was mentioned before, then they're going to be forced to then make maybe some other offsite improvements, pay for that stuff
That's
ahead of
exactly what
time, and then
happens.
that doesn't go in the CFD.
That's exactly what happened. So in the prior CFD grouping, you would see these very large bond amounts, authorization amounts. 25 million was like a standard. With us, you'll see them at 10 million, 8 million, because they're based on actual numbers. In the past, it was just whatever, they just threw a number out. We don't do that.
Go raise a bunch of money and we'll spend it later, right?
I think it was just kind of simple for them to do it, but here we watch it, and I think we set the bonding amount. The other reasons why we do that is we don't want to come back going, hey, there's capacity, let's issue more debt. We're like, no, the capacity was 8 million. We issued 8 million. You're done. 30 years later, they're paid off. There's no other debt.
Okay.
It allows us to close the programs a lot faster.
And
more
so
efficiently.
if I recall as to where we're at in terms of developments and what's going on out there in terms of residential, we have the Meritage Homes that's currently grading, but we've already approved CFDs for that. Am I correct? It's the kind of the far west end of southwestern corner of Fairy Canyon.
We have one more phase left.
Okay.
For C, which will be coming forward. And the part of this exercise will help provide guidance to them on what's to account for. Now, that being said, they're already are factoring in maintenance tax rates.
Because that
and
was
public
annexed land
safety.
at one point.
That,
Yeah.
yes, so that has been implemented. We're just bringing some of that forward.
Okay. And then there's no limit to a developer on the size of the project on how much CFD they want to do, or is there like a kind of a formula to say, hey, if you're not asking for this amount of money, it's not worth forming a CFD? Because if we've got these larger projects that are kind of built out and done, I foresee more smaller infill within the city limits, and I don't know if the city council is going to be all that excited to annex land for residential.
Right. No, that's a great question. There are, and I don't think generally the rule of thumb is, not smaller than 50 units in a facility CFD to be financed, or depends if it's a large scale, large sized units, and that could generate a bond amount that would warrant and cover the cost of issuance, because it's expensive to issue debt. But with those infill type projects, there are other programs that are available to them that maybe the city wouldn't necessarily be the sponsor of because of their small size and nature, and they cobble them together with other developments throughout the state. So there's those programs that are available. That being said, they still wouldn't be required to annex into the city's maintenance services and public safety services CFD to cover those costs separate and apart from a facility CFD. So what we're proposing here would actually allow for the city to have them annexed for services, even if there's not a facility CFD attached to it.
Gotcha, okay. And then you kind of mentioned, and I'm not sure if it's in this proposal, but having the potential for CFDs for commercial and industrial and so forth. I would think that'd be a great idea, for us to have that, because I think there's a potential, for if we have more warehouse development, the south side of town, over in the warehouse district, we'll call it. There's a lot of improvements that would be needed in that area, and there's probably a lot of offsite, infrastructure, and I would imagine they might be, the developer might be interested in as well. So I'd love to see that we are ready to handle it.
Yep, and we're definitely looking at those opportunities at the minimum. And this is, you can't force a developer to get into a CFD. However, for services, they need to mitigate those impacts. So there are other agencies where, you're going to annex into our maintenance services CFD, but your road maintenance cost is going to be triple what a residential unit is because your impacts to those roads are much more significant. And so then you end up having a higher maintenance services tax because you have to repair and maintain those roads. We're talking for perpetuity, not
Gotcha.
just a 30-year window. So.
Okay. And then does any type of development district that could be formed in the future, is that impacted by CFDs? Could they utilize that as multiple developers or anything like that? Does that have any correlation with each other?
I'm not following, I'm sorry.
So I don't know if there is one, but I think there's the potential of a development district being formed in the warehouse area part of town, and
Yeah.
would that be affected by CFDs? Do
No, you can
follow
do,
me?
yeah, I think
Okay.
so. You can create a district and overlay it with a CFD, if that's what I think you're saying. So
Yeah,
yeah, you
okay.
can do that. Like EIFDs and CFDs get talked about as overlays all the time.
Or an RBBD.
Yeah, or an
Oh,
RBBD,
okay.
yeah.
Yes, now I follow you.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
Because should that get developed, I'd love to see a southern east-west road or highway through
Yeah.
Beaumont, and that would maybe go towards that or something.
yeah, yeah. So I think as Brian kind of pointed out with your older projects, there's a path for them. And I think as Shane's pointing out, there's a path where they're just standard conditions of approval where they have to annex in. But there are some, as you're pointing out, which will be negotiated development agreements that will say, all right, here's what we're going to do, the city, here's what you do as developer, and it may include overlay of districts in there. It may say, we will set up a CFD, but they may not actually implement it. It's just something that the city would offer to entice
Because
development.
then that's up to the developer. Do they pay for it up front, or do
correct.
they put it in a CFD
Yeah.
and you pay it over time?
Petrero would be a good example of that. They came to this council, Julio probably remembers many years back for the bridge. Give me 8 million, give me 8 million, give me 8 million. So they said, no, no, no. And they ended up building it and said, well, we'll reimburse you later on when it comes to we're not funding it. So it could be one of those projects where they do a substantial amount of infrastructure just to gain access over there, issue a CFD years later and reimburse themselves for that.
Gotcha, okay. All right, good, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anybody else have questions?
Yes, sir. I do.
All right.
All right, thank you. A couple of quick things. So, when we talk about the philosophy of like passing savings on to the, to the resident, lowering rates, refunding and so forth, is that a written policy that we have, or is that just a practice that our council's been following? And the reason I ask is because, we go into change with councils and so forth, and I'm not sure if we had talked about embedding it in words, but I'm not sure if we did, or if just the fact where you have, for the best of the city in general, goes under that.
Yeah, I think there's two parts to that. One, I think the revised debt policy that Jennifer presented sets percentages
That's correct.
that we look at, but it's the engagement of your financing team that runs the numbers and runs them through staff. And, we're incentivized, obviously, that's what we get paid to do, but this council rewards us so kindly each time we come forward. I mean, they're so generous to us when we do it. I mean, you guys are so happy that it's a pleasure actually to do the work and to bring it forward, knowing the history of the program. It's one of the rare opportunities you ever get to lower taxes. So it's a pleasure to kind of bring them forward. But I think it all starts with your debt policy and then just with your practice. You could amend the goals and policies to have language in there that says that, refinancing opportunities were reviewed on an annual basis and presented to the council once they meet the debt management thresholds. I mean, that you could add language if you needed to or wanted to.
But as of now, we're just working on practice, that what the council's vision is and what we're looking for. So like you said earlier, we're not going to go for this, we're not going to go for that. But that's just kind of the way we've been operating, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
right. Yeah, but you could add it to the policy.
All right.
If you
Yeah,
wanted
and
to.
I think the debt policy that was just recently adopted says that we are reviewing those regularly, and as soon as they're available for savings, they come forward.
Okay, I was just wondering if it should be in words that the policy of the council is to always ensure that, just a kind of an overview. But I don't really think it's necessary, but I'm kind of thinking of the future, because I know we're changing a little bit, and you never know. You know what I mean? Okay, moving forward. So you talked about the annexing about residential or commercial into a CFD. And you talked about their portion being calculated using a fiscal impact model. So in other words, we're doing an analysis for each site specifically, correct? As we come out with the number of their contribution?
So there are two different approaches. For the public safety, there is a point in time fiscal impact analysis for all future development. Excuse me. And for those, for that period of time, residential property would be annexed at, all residential property would be annexed at that rate until a point in time when it's reviewed and determined whether or not that needs to increase, and then that would establish a separate public safety CFD. The fiscal analysis for maintenance services is on a project-by-project basis, so
And
it
how
would
about
be new for
facilities?
each one.
And facilities?
So facilities are separate application requests that are proposed by the developer based on their project, and it is evaluated at the time. However, the services components are layered in, either established with the public safety or as is, or the maintenance that is coming forward with that facility CFD. So for an example, if a developer comes in and says, I want to form a facility CFD, they'll submit an application for that, an application for the maintenance, an application for the public safety, of which all three would come to council as three separate action items for the same project, all of them layered in so that you know what the full cost is on the tax rate.
Now, for the facilities by themselves, I know as we look at the policy, it gives the council an ability to look at these criteria as you set forth, when it meets a significant public health or benefit and so forth. And this could be a legal question, does the council have the right to say, no, I don't think that the CFD fits the needs of the city for that facilities at that time? Services maintenance, I'm not talking about, it's more facilities I'm concerned about.
Yeah, absolutely. The formation of the CFDs and the discretion of the city. I think the only thing that may potentially be contrary to that is if there's, the city has entered into certain development agreements that require the formation of CFDs. I don't believe those development agreements are specific as to actual facilities that have to be financed through the CFDs. So we would have to look at that, Councilmember. But I think that's usually in the discretion of the city. If they don't feel that this improvement benefits the residents of the CFD, or it's not something that serves a larger area, you could elect, not to fund that improvement.
And I know council had talked about, trying not to make sure that they knew that this was business as usual. If there was a place where you'd have to, as the developer, absorb some of that, then it's time that we wean back on to just where it's going to do a CFD automatically. And I think that's where that question comes from, as far as what our ability to do on a case-by-case basis. And now that we've talked about the DAs, I know sometimes we use that to kind of answer some of those questions, but I appreciate that. Brian, I do have a question for you. When you talked about, so on number 4 here of the staff report, it says the city may permit the escalations of any facilities tax in the amount not to exceed 2%. Is that the part you were referring to when you said you were, okay, I had figured it out.
Correct, yeah, yeah.
And then on the number 5, where it says that if the ETR exceeds 2%, the developer is to prepay a portion of the such taxes. So that portion, what are we talking about on a portion? Are we talking about the difference between 2% and whatever the ETR is?
Yeah, exactly. So when we go to issue the bonds, what we would do is we would sort of look at the actual sale prices that are going on in the CFD at the time. And if those actual sale prices are producing a tax rate that would be in excess of 2%, we would require the developer to actually prepay a small portion or portion of those taxes to bring it down below 2%.
Okay, and that portion would be determined by the city?
Yeah, to be by Shane. I mean, Shane would,
Right, Shane would come up with the,
Spicer Consulting would do a calculation, looked at, we would have an appraiser at that point in time that would, and we'd have all the data on what the home sale prices are and what the appraised values are, what they're going for. And we would require as part of a condition for issuance of the bonds or sale of the homes that they pay down those taxes.
okay. And I know in here it says that the city shall may initiate districts by themselves and at any time assist and so forth. For any type of facilities, that could pop up in the future, if the city were to initiate a bond in itself, would we be going back to the one district for everything, or is there a way that you go about that?
Yeah, it would depend on what that improvement is that you want to finance or what it is. You can imagine I've been involved by way of example of a city that wanted to fund a library project that benefited the whole city. And they decided to do that by a citywide CFD. And so in that case, it's a registered vote or election of all the residents within the city. You could imagine that there's some improvements to, one of your main thoroughfares that just benefits certain areas, and you may want to form a CFD or an assessment district on those areas. And so potentially only those property owners that would benefit from that improvement would get assessed or special taxed, and so you draw boundaries accordingly.
Very well. All right, that's all I have. Thank you, sir.
All right, I had one more question. So I was looking at the draft on, there's several examples, but the one I'll give is page 12 of 22 or 16 of 51. But either way, I just was interested in the language here. So, for example, resolution of formation, it says if the city council decides to establish the community facilities district, or for election, if the city council determines to form the community facilities district. What exactly does decide and determine mean? Is it majority vote? Is it?
Yeah, it absolutely is. It's the approval by the city council. By a majority vote of the city council is required to adopt a resolution to form a CFD, or a resolution to even consider going to a public hearing on a CFD requires a majority vote of the city council.
So it's just assumed that it's going to be it's going to be like previous, like any other decision, that it's going to majority vote. You don't need to actually include the language. You'd include the language if it's anonymous or something. You'd include that language. Would you ever include that language? I'm just interested.
Oh, if it's unanimous, there's not a requirement for a unanimous vote in connection with the CFD formation.
Okay.
It's always just a majority vote. There's a couple special situations where if there's an extremely low value to lien of the property, that you could consider going forward with a super majority vote of the property of the council, along with super special findings being made. But the city hasn't, in the 15 years that or 9 or 10 years that I've been with the city, we haven't come across that situation at all.
Okay, but generally, if you see the city council decides, if the city council determines, it should be assumed that is majority vote unless said otherwise.
Correct. Yes, correct.
Okay.
In all instances, that is a majority vote of the council.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So it doesn't need to be repeated over and over, because is it delineated at all, or is it just assumed? Is it delineated in
it's just assumed. Yeah, any council actions a majority vote. Yeah.
It's going to be majority vote. Okay.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think just the key thing, I think the staff report does do a good job at laying out sort of like the 5 fundamental changes from the old policy to the new policy. So that's really the main differences. There's some various wording changes from the old policy to the new policy, just because we started with a different form. But the 5 items that are laid out in the staff report are really the fundamental changes.
Okay. Yeah. Are there any other questions that people have?
So really quickly, so this assessment group, will they handle the reissue of bonds in current tracts? For example, we have a developed tract that's been there for 10, 15 years, and they want to reissue another bond for that tract. How does that partake into this committee? Is that something that they have to go through the same process as a new development?
Yes, they would. If take one of your communities in Sundance or something, say that, and they decide they want to finance new improvements and there's no additional bond authorization or anything left, they would have to go to request to the city council to take proceedings to increase the bonded indebtedness, increase the special taxes, et cetera, or extension of special tax. And that would require, a 2/3 votes of the registered voters within that community at that time, along with approval of the city council to do it.
Yeah, but particularly I was looking at the Sundance scenario. I think it was track 8C, where 10 years after the initial CFD, they pulled a $16 million bond to the developer to fund more for more projects. But my concern was for those individuals that live there. Obviously, they already had CFD in place. The money was already obligated for the building and so forth. But now these individuals in that community are stuck, I guess, repaying a bond that was pulled 10 years after the initial CFD. But yeah,
those taxes were levied throughout that period of time. I mean, again, that one's a little of an interesting situation where, for a variety of reasons, the city had sort of refused to issue bonds, rightly or wrongly, on behalf of the developer over a period of time. The developer threatened to sue the city and involved in various claims against the city, and the city entered into a settlement agreement with the developer at that point in time. And part of that settlement agreement was the agreement to issue those bonds that the developer requested to be issued many years earlier.
Okay, yeah, I was just more concerned in regards to, protecting the communities, protecting those in the tracks already, that already have established, the CFDs. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Mr. Chair, quick question.
Go ahead.
So if this committee were to recommend, as we talked about, or I mentioned, you mentioned, then I thought it was a good idea, about the kind of the industrial area for CFDs, does this policy need to be specifically modified to include that? Or is that could be just a developer that could be knocking on our door in the future?
I don't believe that the policy needs to be specifically modified to address that, but Shane, feel free to jump in.
No, I agree. I think there's direction here on how to handle an application request and consideration by the council, and that would fall in line with looking at that type of a program with that request.
Okay. All right. So for the purpose for us, Mr. Chair, I'm okay with the recommended changes.
All right, so I'll ask for a motion, and so we made a motion.
We need public comment.
Oh, yes, that is true. All right, are there any public comments? Good.
I have no written request. Jackie, do we have any callers on the line?
No callers on the line.
Fantastic. All right, before we get to the, what's that? No. Okay.
Good call. Yeah.
All right, any other questions you guys have before we move on here? We're good? Okay. So I'll ask for a motion then.
So, Mr. Mayor, I move that we recommend the amended and restated Special Assessment and Community Facilities District Goals and Policies to the City Council for approval.
All right, all in favor say aye.
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 All right. I guess other than that, we can look at, do we need to hit any of the other things, or like the subcommittees and all that stuff, or did we hit what we needed to hit?
I put them as placeholders in case there was anything that needed to be discussed.
Okay. All right, then I guess we can adjourn at 7:13.
Mr. Chair, real quick.
Yeah, sure.
Did
Go ahead, David.
on behalf of Jennifer, did we have any finance director comments?
Oh, yes.
No, we don't.
Okay.
No comments. Thank you.
I was waiting too.
With bated breath. All right, cool.
So therefore we're adjourned?
Yeah, we're adjourned.
All right.
Awesome, thank you.